Hello and how's it going, everybody? My name is Mal the Dictator, and today we are going to be walking through each of Knight's 20 add-ons, discussing them, and making a tier list out of it. And so if that's all you're interested in seeing is the end result, I'm going to put that up on the screen right now. So this is the tier list that we are going to build throughout the video. Now, keep in mind that I am valuing add-ons based upon how consistently useful they are, so there may be an add-on that has a very strong effect at a specific circumstance, but I'm going to rate that a little lower than an add-on that you get value out of every single time you use your power over the entire course of the game. And the other thing is that I have a detrimental category here, and these are add-ons that I think actually make you weaker if you bring them into the game. And all of this information is based off of the values from patch 7.0.0, which is June 2023. So some of these placements may change in the future, and if they do, I'll leave a comment or make a note in the description, but I think this list is going to be relevant for a while. So the rest of this video is going to be going through each of these add-ons one by one, and I'll have a timestamp for each add-on if you just want to skip ahead to a specific explanation. And the last thing I have to say before we start is that some of these I have explained in detail already in other videos, so instead of rehashing the same arguments, I'll just redirect you to that video if you want to see the in-depth explanation of how I came to that conclusion. Otherwise, I'll just be talking about the takeaway messages. It's only if you want the details that you would want to go to one of those other videos. So, absolutely no requirement to watch them. It's only for those who are really interested in the reasoning. So, with all that being said, let's start with the brown add-ons, and first up we have the Tattered Tabard, which increases patrol time for all guards by 6 seconds. Now, the thing about patrolling guards is that they are very easy for survivors to avoid. They can see the detection radius and the guards walk very slowly. So if you don't detect a survivor in the first few seconds of placing down your guard, it doesn't matter how long the patrol is, you're never going to be able to catch a good survivor. Now, a lot of people like to use patrol time to either protect objectives or to, maybe cut off an area of the map if you put it in a choke point and zone survivors away. But again, good survivors realize that card effects and Jailer are no threat when they're hunting you. You can easily outrun them, especially with the new survivor perk of Made for This, which allows injured survivors to move at 103%. Your guards can literally not catch up to those survivors. So if there is any degree of coordination, one survivor can be chased and be absolutely unthreatened by any guard. So patrolling really doesn't help you zone out, it really doesn't help you protect objectives, and it really doesn't help you camp. So against any experienced survivor, patrol time is just time that you do not get your power back. And because Tattered Tabard means that you don't get your power back for an extra 6 seconds, I'm going to say that this is actually a disadvantage to bring because it just prolongs you recovering your power and being able to use your guards in a more effective situation. So we're actually going to put this down here in detrimental. Now, next up we have Pillaged Mead, which decreases the amount of time it takes a guard to complete their orders by 25%. So we have two relevant orders that we're going to discuss here, which is breaking pallets and damaging generators. So it takes the card effects 2 seconds to complete an order. This brings it down to 1.5 seconds, and it takes Assassin and Jailer 6 seconds to complete an order. This brings it down to 4.5. So let's look at pallets first. Well, Carnifex with his base value of 2 seconds is able to break a pallet fast enough for you to walk through him during the animation as if the pallet weren't even there. So the fact that this makes that even shorter doesn't matter to you because 2 seconds is already fast enough. Now for Assassin and Jailer, you're still going to have to sit behind them for 4.5 seconds while they wail away at the pallet, and in that time the survivor is going to be running away, so you're just going to leave your guard anyway. You're pretty much never going to stand behind them and wait the whole time for them to finish breaking the pallet. So when it comes to breaking pallets, Pillaged Mead really doesn't have any practical effect. On the other hand, we have the order to damage generators, and this is a really powerful effect. This, I think, might actually be the strongest use of Knight's power, because when your guards are doing the animation to damage a generator. Survivors cannot interact with that as if it was blocked by the entity. And so Assassin and Jailer are able to block generators. So you summon your guard 32 meters away, they block the generator for 6 seconds, and at the end of that, they do 5% of the gen's progress, which can buy you up to 10.5 seconds. And during that time, you can close the gap of the 32 meters and regain control of the generator. So it is a really powerful effect for stopping survivors. And the fact that Pillaged Mead reduces that amount of time that you're blocking it can lose you a gen, especially if you're trying to hold on to one that's like 99% complete. And there have been so many games where I was able to hold on by the skin of my teeth just because I was able to send guards out and stop survivors from working on it for enough time to actually regain control, that losing any second during those situations could have lost me the game. And because of that, I am going to put Pillaged Mead also under detrimental. And in fact, I think it is the worst add-on that the knight has. Now that we've talked about the worst add-on, we're going to move on to Knight's best add-on, which is Map of the Realm. And I did an entire video explaining why I think this is Knight's best add-on. I think it's one of the best brown add-ons in the game. In fact, I think it's one of the best add-ons in the game in general in terms of how much it increases the Knight's lethality. So when you bring Map of the Realm, it increases the area that Carnifex and Assassin can detect survivors by 4 times. And I don't know any other add-on that increases the lethality of your power 4 times. It's absolutely insane. So, essentially, the Carnifex and Assassin have a detection range of 8 meters, and in the time that it takes them to reach that 8 meters, survivors can have run 10 meters. And so basically, if the survivors are running, you will miss detecting them every single time with Carnifex and Assassin. By adding 4 meters to that distance with Map of the Realm, you actually give them a chance to detect survivors, and because of that, this add-on is pretty much necessary to bring every single game just in order to have a fighting chance. And because of that, we're going to put this as always helpful. Literally no downside to it, and it just increases your ability to start hunts incredibly. Thank God it's a brown, because you pretty much need to bring this every match. Alright, and our last Brad add-on here is going to be the Gritty Lump, and this increases the guard's movement speed while on patrol by 9%. Now, just like we talked about with the Tattered Tabard, you really don't want your guards to be patrolling for any length of time, because your power is better spent just bringing out another guard and putting them in a better spot, or using them to perform an order or hunt survivors. So again, the fact that this affects guards while they're on patrol really doesn't have any effect on the game, and because of that, we're going to put this in practically useless. Okay, so that is it for the browns. Let's move on to the yellow add-ons, and for these yellow add-ons, 3 of them are devoted to summoning each of the guard twice in a row. And the only thing I'll say before we go into that is that in my Which Guard is Best video, I explained why I think that Carnifex and Assassin are evenly valuable and Jailer is bad. And so, based on those discussions, I'm going to talk about the value of these. So Treated Blade allows you to summon the Assassin twice in a row. Now, the Assassin is very consistently valuable. It's really good at chasing survivors and injuring them, and it's also very good at holding generators, like we talked about with the Pillaged Mead. And this strength is useful throughout the entire game. So, because of that, having 2 Assassins in your rotation throughout the entire match is actually really good. You're always going to want to hunt survivors, you're always going to want to kick generators with your guards, and so I think that this is going to be mostly helpful. Because I can't think of a situation where I would hate to have an Assassin in my hand. Next up, we have Dried Horsemeat. Now, this one requires a little bit of math, and basically, this is going to affect how lethal your guards are over the course of a hunt. So, Jailer will close 1.2 meters on a survivor over the course of his hunt, which is really nothing. I mean, survivors run at a rate of 4 meters per second, so this is basically a quarter of a second. The distance a survivor runs in a quarter of a second is what you're going to close over the course of 12 seconds. So, you're really not going to get much value out of a Jailer. So, this increases the distance he covers from 1.2 to 1.6. It changes Carnifex from 2.4 to 2.8, and it changes the Assassin from 4.8 to 6.4. So that's actually a pretty huge bonus. So this is very good on Assassin in terms of letting him close more distance and damage survivors more consistently. It also allows the Carnifex to get a few more hits, but it also allows the Carnifex to harass survivors for a little bit longer. Normally, he chases them for 24 seconds, which is 24 seconds they can't work on objectives, and this increases it to 28 seconds. So almost a full 30 seconds that you know a survivor isn't working on objectives, which is pretty good. So, this has a huge effect on Assassins, it has an okay effect on Carnifex, and it's pretty much negligible whenever you summon your Assassin. Now, the flip side of this is that there are situations where you wish you could end a hunt prematurely and get your power back, and this add-on is going to make it so that every single hunt that happens is 4 seconds longer, and sometimes you wish you could get your power back 4 seconds sooner. So, there are situations where this can be a detriment, but for the most part, it is mostly useful, so we're going to put it in that category. But again, remember, it helps Assassin the most, Carnifex second most, and it's pretty much negligible on Jailer. Alright, next up we have the Cold Steel Manacles, which allows Jailer to be summoned twice in a row. Now this might be my hottest take, and as I talked about in the Which Guard is Best video, I think Jailer is terrible. The only thing he has going for him is detection range, and his ability to kick generators, which is as good as the Assassin. So, he does have a good detection range, but his hunt is so slow and so short that survivors literally don't need to worry about being injured by him. And so really his only strength is to kick generators. That's the only time you get consistent value out of him. Whenever I have Jailer up in my rotation when I play Knight, I know I am not going to get much value out of Knight's power. And so the fact that this happens twice in a row with Cold Steel Manacles, on top of the fact that you are prolonging your ability to get a Carnifex again, I think actually makes you weaker over the course of a round. And so because of that, I'm going to say Cold Steel Manacles is actually detrimental, because Jailer is so weak, you never want to have him twice, and you would much rather have a Carnifex sooner. I can't think of any situation where you would want to use this. And next up, we have Call to Arms. Now this increases the length of your patrol path, so where you are drawing to send out your guard, by 10 meters. So you go from 32 meters to 42. And while creating the path, you do it 25% faster. So, literally, there is no downside to this. It only lets you summon your guards further and faster. This really lets you control gens, it lets you plot out better paths, it lets you scout better. So, literally no downside to Call to Arms. We're going to put this in always helpful. I don't think it is as helpful as Map of the Realm, which literally increases the lethality of your power, but it does let you use your power in better ways. So no reason not to bring it. It's a fantastic add-on on its own. And next up we have the Battleaxe Head, which is the last one that lets you summon a guard twice in a row, and this guard is the Carnifex. Now, going back to my comparison of the guards, I think Carnifex is a fantastic guard at the beginning of the map, basically as long as there are pallets around. So any map that has a lot of pallets, or the beginning of the match where the entire map is full of pallets, Carnifex is really, really good. It gives you a very strong early game and can single-handedly win you some chases. The thing is at the end of the game, imagine you have destroyed every pallet. Carnifex isn't better than Assassin in any way. It's weaker at chasing, and it's worse at controlling generators, which is basically the only things you're doing at the end of a game. So if you have a game that's dragging on, you would actually kind of be disappointed to have 2 Carnifexes in a row. You would much rather have access to an Assassin instead. That being said, having Battleaxe Head can completely let you steamroll the beginning of a match and not even get to a situation where you need to worry about the end of the game because you were so powerful early on. You might be able to end the game in 8 minutes or something like that. So I'm going to put this into probably mostly helpful. The only thing is that because Assassin is more consistently powerful and the Battleaxe Head depends a lot on things outside of your control, like what map you go to, whether or not your survivors are dropping pallets, and at what point of the game you're in, its value fluctuates a little bit. And so that's why I would personally put the Treated Blade just above Carnifex. But again, this can absolutely let you steamroll in the beginning of the game. It's more a question of, do you consistently get value out of one or the other? This one you can definitely get more value out of in specific circumstances, but this one I think you get more consistent value out of. But they, again, both guards are pretty much tied in value, so we're going to put both of them here and mostly helpful. I think Assassin just has a slight edge, but maybe that's just with my playstyle, and you might value it differently. So that being said, that is the end of the yellows, and we are on to the greens. Now, unfortunate spoiler alert, all of Knight's greens are pretty terrible. But let's go through and explain why. First up, we have the Town Watch's Torch, and this has quite a few things to talk about. So the first thing is that it triggers when survivors escape guard hunts without being hit. So that means you have to fail a hunt, and 3 times you have to do that. So you have to fail 3 hunts in order for this to trigger. And then your knight gains undetectable for 25 seconds. So undetectable, they don't see your red stain, they don't hear your tear radius, and if they have any aura reading abilities, they can't see you. So let's think about escaping 3 hunts first. Well, let's think about the 3 guards. You have Carnifex, which hunts for 24 seconds, you have Assassin, which hunts for 12, and you have Jailer, which hunts for 12. So they need to escape 24, 12, and 12, which is 48 seconds of being chased before this triggers. And that is such a long amount of time. Like, how many times do you think you can trigger that in a match? Like 3, 4? Like, it happens so rarely, you're probably not going to activate that all that much. And one of the worst parts of that is that it's a completely random time when it triggers. When you start hunting a survivor, you don't know if you're going to get undetectable. Maybe the survivor gets hit. So you can't even really plan around this effect because you don't know which hunts are going to be successful and which are going to lose. Now, the next thing. When your guard is hunting a survivor, usually as a knight, you are working together with your guard to cut off the survivor and let one of you get a hit. So in that case, you're going to be behind the survivor along with your guard, and so the moment you go undetectable, it doesn't matter, because the survivor who's running away from you knows exactly where you are. They know that you are behind them along with your guard, and so the fact that you lose your terror radius doesn't matter. The fact that they can't see your aura doesn't matter because they can see your physical body. Now, maybe the red stain can get you some value. You know, if they escape a hunt by going into a tile, maybe you can do a few mind games where they don't expect you to be where you are because they can't see your red stain. But again, it's so unreliable on when this is going to trigger, you can pretty much never account for it in your own actions. It's completely by luck. So I really think it's extremely difficult to get any value out of this. It's too hard to activate, it's too weak of an effect, and it's completely outside of your control for when it happens. So because of all those reasons, I'm going to put this into practically useless. Now next up, we have the Ironworker's Tongs, which is a very similar effect, because it happens when a survivor escapes a guard hunt successfully. And this is okay, because it's every single guard hunt. And survivors and jailers, survivors can escape Carnifexes and jailers pretty consistently, like I mentioned before, because they have very slow hunts. So the fact that this triggers basically whenever a Carnifex or jailer is hunting, means that this is going to activate pretty regularly, maybe 15 to 20 times in a match. And then that survivor suffers from Oblivious for 20 seconds, so they cannot hear your terror radius. But again, this has the same shortcomings as the undetectable part of the Town Watch's Torch, where when they're being hunted, you're pretty much going to be next to them anyway. So the fact that they can't hear your terror radius doesn't matter, because they can physically see where you are, and in this instance, it's not even like you're losing your red stain. So really the only thing this does is remove your terror radius from a survivor, and you might bring perks that depend on your terror radius, like Infectious Fright or something like that. So honestly, the only value I can really see you getting out of this, well, it's not even value, it's the only effect I can see you getting out of this is losing any terror radius effect that you might have. So this might even go into detrimental. It really depends on what perks you're bringing, so I'll just put it into practically useless, because most times you won't have those terror radius type perks you're bringing. Now, it might be above Town Watch Torch because it triggers more often, but honestly, I think these are like both useless that it doesn't matter. But we'll put it just ahead of Town Watch Torch, just because, it triggers a lot more often than this one does. So maybe you'll get something out of not having a terror radius, but I doubt it. I don't think there's any reason you think you would get enough value to actually equip it during your loadout. Next up, we have the Grim Iron Mask. And this is whenever a survivor is detected by a guard. So this happens a lot more frequently. It doesn't matter what happens during the hunt. It can be successful, it can be a failure. All that needs to happen is that they're detected. And if you're bringing this with Map of the Realm, that happens pretty often. So, once they're detected, the survivor suffers from blindness for 60 seconds. Essentially, survivors are going to be blind for the entire duration of the hunt, and a little bit after. Which is pretty good. But let's see how actually useful this is. So, a survivor is going to be blind. They cannot see auras from any of their powers while they're being hunted, and a little bit after. So what does this actually counter? Well, it depends entirely on what the survivors bring. Maybe they don't have any aura reading abilities at all, so you wouldn't counter any perks or anything like that. Basically, this will stop them from seeing, downed survivors, hooked survivors, and, a few of those cases where you automatically see auras. But I think what this would really counter are things like windows of opportunity, which survivors depend on a lot when they're being chased. It would counter perks like Bond or Empathy that allow survivors to see their allies. And a lot of times people bring Bond so that they know where not to lead the killer. So, if they see that, oh, I have 2 survivor allies to my right, I'm going to take the survivor to the left so that he doesn't disrupt those 2. So it would counter situations like that. And, if a survivor brings a key with the add-on that allows them to see the knight's aura to, try to mind game around a tile, Grim Iron Mask would counter that. So there are a few things that this would be really good against. Again, windows of opportunity, Bond, keys. The only thing is that you cannot ever count on survivors bringing that. You might have a game where everybody does that. For example, a lot of times survivors like to bring you to Leary's and then bring windows of opportunity in live. And if you have Grim Iron Mask, maybe you would be able to counter the windows of opportunity. They wouldn't find vault locations and you could down them more easily. But again, it is all dependent on what the survivors bring. There's nothing you can count on independently that would get you any value out of this. And because of that, I am going to place Grim Iron Mask in situational. and that's because it's entirely dependent on the survivor loadouts. You may get value out of this in like 1 out of every 100 games, but again, that value has nothing to do with your choices. It's entirely on what the survivors chose to bring. So we'll put it in situational. Next up, we have Chainmail Fragment. And when your guard damages a survivor, this will inflict hemorrhaging on that survivor, which means that they drop more pools of blood. Now, hemorrhaging is a pretty weak effect in general. You know, it makes the pools of blood more frequent, but most of the time you're just going to be able to use scratch marks anyway. There's very few instances where you rely on the hemorrhaging. So honestly, this is practically useless because hemorrhaging is just such a weak effect to begin with. But, I mean, I guess it's better than these other 3. Okay, next up we have the Broken Hilt. And this is very similar to the Chainmail Fragment because it happens whenever your guard injures a survivor, and this gives them the Mangled effect, which makes them gives them an extra 25% time to heal. So it's basically like running Sloppy Butcher on your guards, which is a pretty decent effect. I mean, all it does is buys you time. There's literally no downside to this. The only thing is that you don't really trigger it all that often. It's whenever your guard damages a survivor, and that's pretty much only going to happen with your assassin. And a lot of times when you're working together with your guard, you're going to be the one to down them, and the guard is just zoning them out over the course of a hunt. So how often does this trigger a game? Maybe 6-7 times. So, you know, there's no downside to it, but it's just not a strong enough effect to really justify bringing it. So I'm going to put this in a little helpful, but there are better options. And that's it for the greens. And if we take a look, I mean, most of them, again, like situational, yes, there are some times where you would be able to get value out of this, but really no reason to bring it since you can't count on what the survivors are going to do. And then, like, everything else basically doesn't give you any benefit, and it just makes me so sad that, like, none of the greens have any real use, and you look at other killers, their greens are pretty good. But not the case for Knight, unfortunately. But that being said, let's move on to the purples, and first up we have the Lightweight Greaves. And I should mention that 3 of these purples trigger whenever you summon each of your guards. So the Lightweight Greaves is for your jailer. Whenever you summon your jailer, the Knight's movement speed increases by 10% for 6 seconds. So 10% is a pretty good speed boost. It's like having 2 stacks of Play With Your Food or Devour Hope. It lets you move at 125% of survivor move speed for 6 seconds. But here's the thing. 6 seconds translates to 6 meters of extra distance at this speed, which is as far as a survivor can run in 1.5 seconds. And I guarantee you that anytime you summon your jailer, it is going to take more than 1.5 seconds of your time to put him down. So in the time it takes you to actually activate this, the survivor is going to make more distance than if you didn't stop to summon your jailer in the first place. So basically this gives you no bonus. Maybe there are some times you can corner a survivor and get them done faster, or maybe beat them to a window if you're zoning them off with the jailer and you run to cut them off. But in most circumstances, the time it takes you to activate this is going to be longer than the time you recover from the actual effect. And so because of that, we're going to also put Lightweight Greaves into practically useless. And honestly, this is actually tough. You might get more benefit out of hemorrhage than this, because if you're trying to play around this, if you're like, oh, I have a jailer, let's hold on to him and get a speed boost and do something fancy, I think you're going to screw yourself over more times trying to play around this than you would if you just continued running after a survivor normally. Alright, next up we have Healing Poultice, and this triggers when you summon your assassin. And so, whenever you summon your assassin, all survivors within 24 meters of where your assassin is, when he appears, they scream and they reveal their location for 5 seconds. So again, you can summon a guard 32, or an assassin 32 meters away, and then people 24 meters away from that assassin will scream. So you can kind of scout out like 56 meters from your current location. If you bring Call to Arms on top of that, you can scout out, what'd that be, 66 meters? So this actually gives you really good information. And another thing is this is extremely predictable. It's every single time you summon your assassin, so you know exactly when you're going to get this effect triggered. So it's really good. Now let's look at the effect itself. Survivors scream, which means that they interrupt their actions. So if you bring like a hex build, you have a lot of totems that are lit, you can use this to protect your totems. So if you want to see whether a survivor is cleansing one of your important totems, you send an assassin out there. If they scream, they stop cleansing the totem, and they have to restart from scratch, which gives you enough time to go over and protect it. So it's really good for totems. There are some killer perks that synergize really well with interrupting survivors, like Dead Man's Switch. You can send out an assassin to a gen that you know is about to be completed, put him down, survivors scream, which means they let go of the generator. Now it's blocked by Dead Man's Switch for 30 seconds. Really good synergy with some killer perks. Also, if you have a survivor in the dying state, you're worried about a survivor with a flashlight or doing a pallet save, something like that, you can drop down your assassin right on top of the survivor. You'll reveal anyone within 24 meters, and you'll know whether you need to chase somebody off or if you're free to pick up the survivor. Even if you don't get anybody to scream, so you send your assassin to some location, some generator, you plop him down, you don't get any scream. But you do get information. You know that you don't have survivors over there. So even when this quote-unquote doesn't work, you're still getting valuable information. You know that you need to go to some other part of the map. So literally no downside to bringing this. It's very consistent. You get a lot of value in different situations out of it. You can base your loadouts around this perk, or this add-on, and get extra value from your perks. And it's just all around really good. Good information, good interruption. So we are going to put this into always helpful. Literally no downside to bring this, and you get good information. I'll probably put it below Call to Arms, because Call to Arms triggers literally every single time you put down a guard. So it works on everybody, whereas this only happens on your assassin. So maybe we'll put it just below Call to Arms. But again, very, very good add-on to bring. Next up, we have the Flint and Steel, which triggers whenever you summon the card effects. And when that happens, you can see the auras of survivors that are within 24 meters of downed pallets for 5 seconds. So again, this is a very predictable perk. You know this is going to trigger every single time you summon the card effects. You get aura reading, so you get some information. And you get to see them for 5 seconds. So this seems pretty good, but let's look at what this means. So this is only by downed pallets. So if a pallet hasn't been dropped yet, you don't see it, and if you've broken a pallet, you don't get to see the auras around it. Now let's think about which pallets are down. Usually, it's going to, well, pretty much always, it's going to be where you have chased survivors in the past. And so a lot of times you have to break a pallet during a chase in order to get to a survivor. And if you leave it up, you're just leaving resources for your survivors to use at a later date. And also, where do good survivors run you? They run you in places that don't matter anymore. They run you around tiles where generators have been completed. They run you around places that are away from the rest of the team. If they have a boon totem, they're not going to run you toward that. So if they are dropping pallets anywhere, it's going to be in locations that are not valuable. So if there's a down pallet and you see a survivor around that down pallet, it's probably not going to be the most useful survivor to go after. You would want to go after survivors working on places that still have survivor resources. So, because of that, I honestly don't think that this... It's good in theory, but in practice, I've rarely gotten use out of it. The information you get is around areas that you're not interested in. It means that you need to actively avoid breaking pallets to get more value out of this. And you're the knight. You don't even need to break pallets yourself. You can send out any of your guards to break pallets and not worry about it. So honestly, in exchange for sacrificing your ability to get rid of every pallet, just for the chance to see a survivor within 24 meters of it, I don't think it's worth it at all. I would much rather be sure that a pallet doesn't exist anymore. So because of that, I am going to place Flint and Steel under a little helpful. I mean, you do get information. There's no downside to bringing this. But I don't think the information that you get is actionable. Like, if you see the aura of a survivor, I don't think they're going to be in an area of the map that you actually want to go to. So we'll put it in a little helpful, but again, much better options to increase your strength over the course of the game. And finally, we have the Blacksmith's Hammer. And this says that whenever a survivor escapes a hunt, so again, whenever a hunt fails, that survivor is hindered. Now, ignore this, because the hindered is 3%, which is pretty laughable. I mean, it's essentially nothing. 3% slower is rarely going to do anything for you, and you certainly shouldn't base your decisions around a 3% slower survivor. So pretend that doesn't exist, but they do become exhausted for 15 seconds. Now, again, this is going to be once they escape a hunt. So this isn't going to stop exhaustion perks like Sprint Burst, because that's going to trigger as soon as the survivor starts running at the beginning of the hunt. What the exhausted is going to stop are basically the perks Overcome, Dead Hard, Live, and Bounce Landing, which is pretty rare. So, basically, back when Dead Hard was on every survivor, you always had to wait, 10 seconds for them to activate it. You would waste a lot of time because you had to bait out Dead Hard for every single survivor. This was actually a pretty good perk because you could chase a survivor safe in the knowledge that you could lunge, that you could swing, knowing that they wouldn't be able to use a Dead Hard against you. But since Dead Hard was nerfed, very few survivors run it these days. It's a lot less impactful, and so the real value of Blacksmith's Hammer doesn't exist just because the meta has shifted. Now, if Dead Hard ever makes a comeback, I would probably say Blacksmith's Hammer would go up in value. But as it is, I think in its current state, this is going to be an extremely situational add-on. It is entirely dependent upon whether or not your survivors have those 4 perks I mentioned. So if your survivors don't have that at all, this is literally going to give you no value. So we'll put it in situational. Again, just like Grim Iron Mask, it's entirely within the survivor's control whether or not you get any use out of this. And that's it for the purples. So let's go on to our iridescents. And we have the Knight's Contract. Now, this says that every 4th guard summoned causes survivors within 12 meters of that summoned guard to suffer from the exposed status for 8 seconds. So, 12 meters is a pretty short range around where you summon your guard, and 8 seconds is pretty short. I mean, when I first read this add-on, I thought, oh, well, how often is it that you are able to hit a survivor with an M1 8 seconds after summoning your guard? But the answer is, pretty often, if you find yourself in the right situation. So, there are a lot of times where you can kind of force this out. Probably the best one is when you have a card effect, being your 4th guard, you chase a survivor they drop a pallet and they stand behind it, well, you send out your card effects, you can instantly walk through. The survivors cannot get away from you for 8 seconds, and you can instantly down them. So when you have the card effects break pallet exposed combo, this is an absolutely disgusting add-on to have. Now, unfortunately, that's only ever going to happen like every 12 guards you send out, but when it does trigger, it is really, really good. Another situation, you are running after a survivor, their ally is healthy, and they go in to take a protection hit. You instantly drop a guard, you hit the healthy survivor instead, they instantly go down because they're not expecting to be dropped when they're healthy. And another evil situation you can use this for is, you know a survivor is going to go for an unhook. You go to the hook, set down the guard as the person is unhooking. The savior is now exposed. You hit the healthy survivor, they instantly go down. You get another free hook. So there are plenty of these situations that pop up, let alone just playing the game normally and survivors not being able to know which guard is going to expose them. I mean, that's one of the downsides of this perk for the knight, is that it's every 4th guard, so you really have to be focused and concentrated during this match for you to get much value out of this. If you lose track of which guard is going to trigger this effect, then it's basically like you're not playing with Knight's Contract, because you cannot play around knowing when a person's exposed. So, on top of keeping track of where survivors are, which gens are being worked on, what hook state everybody's on, now you have to keep track of which of your guards is going to trigger this exposed status. It can be a lot, and if you are tired, or if you're not, paying full attention to the game, you can easily lose track of this add-on and lose any value. However, when you do get value out of this, it can be completely game-changing. I would probably say on average, I get 2 or 3 hits per exposed hits when I use this, and that's enough to completely change the course of a match. I mean, if you have 2 people hooked and then you expose a 3rd one, like, the game is over at that point. It's very hard for survivors to recover. So it's not as reliable as these others, but there's literally no downside to this. And it has such a huge effect. I'm going to put this into always helpful. I think it's a really good add-on to bring. And I have also had lots of games where as soon as survivors saw this was in play, they quit just because they fell for getting exposed. So you can get some easy games just because survivors don't want to deal with it. But that's more of a negative side, because you don't get to enjoy a full game. But it is that powerful where survivors just don't want to deal with it sometimes. Now finally, we have our last Iridescent, and that is the Iridescent Company banner. Now, this has quite a bit of text, but you can think of it as being a combination of 3 different killer perks. So, the first thing, while a survivor is hunted by a guard, spikes block the exit for the hunted survivor. So if a survivor is being chased after an exit gate is opened and they try to leave the trial, they cannot leave, as if you had brought Blood Warden. And they are blocked for quite a while from leaving. So if they try to leave the trial, they're blocked, so they hit a wall, your guard comes and hits them, you're right behind your guard, you hit them, there's still a buffer of like 5 seconds where the survivor cannot crawl out. So you can get a double hit and still have enough time to pick up the survivor before they're able to leave. This is incredibly good at securing 1 kill, 1 extra kill in the trial. So, really strong effect at the very end of the game. The second thing, when the survivor vaults while they're being hunted, that vault location is blocked for all survivors for the duration of the hunt. So this is kind of like Hex crowd control. A survivor jumps through a window and they cannot use that window again for the duration of the hunt. Now, the thing about this is it's the duration of the hunt, which for Assassin and Jailer is going to be 12 seconds. And at what point during the hunt is the survivor going to vault a window? Could be the very beginning, could be the very end. So this really gives you variable value. You might get 12 seconds out of this. You might get 6 seconds out of this. You might get it blocked for 1 second. It's very hard to predict. It is better for Carnifex because he chases for 24 seconds. So you have a higher likelihood to get a longer window block. But how much value are you going to get out of this? Very hard to say, very hard to rely on. It's very hard to actually play around. Basically, if you get value out of it, you go, oh, that was really fortunate. Not, oh my god, I planned that perfectly. I'm a genius. And then the third part is, while drawing the patrol path, passing through vault locations will block these locations for 15 seconds. So this is kind of like preemptively using Bamboozle to block a vault location. Now, again, this sounds pretty good, and this is for 15 seconds, which is a decent amount of time. But this requires a lot of planning, a lot of prediction, and you leave a lot of stuff up to chance. So, if you block a vault location, what are the odds that the survivor is going to take that exact path to try to go through that vault location? Kind of depends. Depends on the map, depends on the area in the map. Is their only chance for escape a vault location? Maybe, but more than likely a survivor is going to have 3 different paths they can choose from, and as soon as they know that you have your Iridescent Company banner, they're going to go for places that don't have vault locations, or that they knew you didn't shut off. And on top of that, probably Shack is like the only consistent area that you would be able to shut off with this. Shut down a Shack location, and you know that they can't get through. The other thing is that there are a lot of vault locations that you cannot pass your patrol path through. So, any second level vault location where, you know, survivors do a fall. So basically any vault that would activate a balanced landing, you cannot send a guard through because you can't send your guard into midair. Like, you can't make a patrol path go over the edge of a cliff. You can't make it go through a window. So these are all vault locations that you do not have access to. So you're basically only talking about shutting down tiles. You're not going to shut down like the meat hopper in the game. You're not going to shut down anything on the top of Thompson House. Like any window that makes you drop, you're not going to be able to block. So even though it says vault locations, it's very difficult to find a place that would work, especially one that would completely shut down a survivor during a case. So this has a lot of effects, lots of effects. It covers, you know, the properties of like 3 different perks. But I would say the only truly consistent use you can get out of this is hunting a survivor at the very end of the game and securing a kill. So, very powerful effect at the very end of the game. But the question is, would you have done better the rest of the game if you had brought a different add-on? And because of that, because I think the only useful time that you would be able to use this is at the end of a game. Oh, sorry. I'm messing this up. There we go. All right. The only time that you would get consistent value out of this is at the end of the game. I don't think that you would get really any benefit for the rest of the match, and you'd be better off with a different one. So I'm gonna put this probably in a little helpful, and it's definitely better than these 2. So we'll put it right there. Okay, so this is what we have. Let's evaluate this a little bit just to make sure that we think everything is where it's supposed to be. I definitely agree with these. Honestly, like these might be detrimental because you're losing your tear radius, and sometimes you might have a build around that. But most of the times you aren't. So I'm gonna leave these at practically useless. I think these are good. These are definitely situational. They rely entirely on what the survivors bring. Nothing within your control. And then, yeah, I think slowing down healing is better than seeing people around pallets in areas that don't matter. This, I mean, this doesn't have downsides. I guess this depends on how reliably you're able to use Iridescent Company Banner. I personally, in practice, have not been able to do any game-changing plays with this, except again at the very end of a match where you can basically guarantee an extra kill. But for the rest of the game, really hard to get consistent value out of this. So I'm happy leaving it on the high end of a little helpful. Again, this is mostly helpful for Assassin and Carnifex and basically negligible for Jailer. Both of these are pretty good. And yeah, I'm happy with this. So, there we have it. That is going to be our finalized tier list as of patch 7.0.0. I hope you found this information useful. If there's anything you disagree with, please explain your reasoning in the comments. I would love to reevaluate this. If anybody thinks I've grossly mischaracterized one of these add-ons. Yeah, and basically, if I had to say what to buy in a Blood Web, I would probably go for these top 7, maybe Iridescent Company Banner, but it's Iridescent, so it's very expensive. I don't know that you get enough value out of it to justify 5,000 blood points, but I'd probably say these top 7 are a safe one to go for. Anything under situational, or situational and below, I don't think is going to be worth your while ever, which is unfortunate because this is what, is that 10? Yeah, 2, 7, 10. Man, a full half of the Knight's add-ons I think either have no effect or are detrimental to you, which is so disappointing. And of the ones that are good, like 5 of them, half of the good ones are yellow and below. It's like, oh no, what have they done to my boy? Alright, well, with that being said, I don't really know what more I have to add. This has already gone on for 50 minutes, so I hope it wasn't too long, and I hope you got some valuable information out of it. And thank you all for watching this long, and until next time, I wish you all the best.